Hi students, welcome to our writing style series. Previously, we've discussed how in order to have a more formal tone in your writing, you're generally going to want to avoid things like personal pronouns, contractions, and any overly vague language. In this video, we'll talk about avoiding cliches. So what exactly is a cliche? Since the word cliché is French, cliché, I'll try to illustrate with a quote from French poet Gérard de Nerval. The first man to compare a woman to a rose was a poet. The second, an imbecile. In other words, once it's not original anymore, it really loses its punch. It becomes cliché. Now, if we're looking for a more precise definition, then according to the Cambridge English Dictionary, a cliché is a saying or remark that is very often made and is therefore not original and not interesting. So, for example, you might say that someone is your flesh and blood. Imagine the first time that phrase was being used, how original it would have sounded, how poetic to call somebody who is your family, who is genetically tied to you, your flesh and blood. It sounds quite visceral. But at this point, we've used the phrase so many times throughout history that it's totally lost that kind of impact. And that's why we do not use cliches in formal writing. And it's not just academic writing. In creative writing, you would absolutely also want to avoid cliches. So basically all around, no cliches. Okay, so what are some of the most common kinds of cliche expressions and phrases that tend to pop up in student writing? Let's run through an abbreviated list. In this day and age, nowadays, as a matter of fact, more and more, due to the fact that, all in all, when it comes to that being said, in the long run, at the end of the day, has been around for it all started in, or it all started when, it costs a fortune. It's easier said than done. Few and far between, in the nick of time, better late than never, day in, day out. For what it's worth, in a nutshell, it goes without saying. Make the best of it. Needless to say. All right, so these are just a few of the kinds of expressions that we tend to see in student writing, but there's a much longer list of these. So it's really up to you to start spotting these types of expressions. And the more you do it, the more second nature it will become. And you'll get to a point where when you spot these cliche expressions, it'll actually be like a little bit cringe when you see it. And that's where you want to get to, because then you'll be sure to never incorporate them in your own writing. So we avoid cliches because they're unoriginal and they're also rather meaningless most of the time. But there's another reason. We also avoid cliches because they tend to be unnecessarily wordy. But that's an entirely different element that we need to discuss. So we will tackle that in our next video on avoiding wordiness.